Ready to make business overtures to the Pink Pagoda, Sitara sent a message a few hours in advance to the proprietor, a man who Kasumi seemed to know a great deal about, much to her curiosity. In the meantime, Dasha and Akash spent some time at a nearby bathhouse, and Vendela assisted Mezzi in dressing up for their meeting, of which Diallo heartily approved. That afternoon, the crew arrived at the Pink Pagoda and introduced themselves to the matron at the door. They caught the end of a very formal dance in the pagoda's theater before meeting with the owner of the establishment, Matsumoto Yuki. He accepted the samples of Dasha's herbal fig concoction and agreed to try them out that evening and get back to them the following day if he was interested in purchasing a supply. In exchange, he offered the crew a private audience of each of their choosing. While Kasumi declined the offer, the others were taken to their private entertainments. Mezzi received a very relaxing massage. Dasha viewed a rather odd acrobatic contortionist performance. Akash enjoyed pleasant conversation with Ri Aiko, a woman educated in the local wineries. Sitara was graced with a very technical and rhythmic dance with 2 short sticks by Yamashita Sakura, Matsumoto's star dancer, and the young woman they had seen on stage when they arrived. Impressed by her fluidity and precision, Sitara did her best to express her admiration and compare their styles of movement with her limited Menzoken. Eventually abandoning verbal discourse, they took up the batons and improvised a playful duet. After their private entertainments ended, the group returned to the main hall and ran into their pilot Kamal, who had made the trip to enjoy some performances himself. They also made the acquaintance of Helene, a Dacian woman whose table was covered in plates of what appeared to be samples of the entire menu. Predicting that a second dark would one day arrive, Helene had become a merchant of survival goods, primarily foodstuffs. Intrigued by the eccentric woman, Sitara invited her to share their booth in exchange for Helene sharing her feast. Helene graciously accepted, and they enjoyed the fine food, discussing business and swapping tales until the lights dimmed, and a pair of Menzoken twins appeared on the stage. As the twins danced, they were followed about the stage by a dark-robed figure singing about their connections. Following the opening act, the crew suddenly understood why Kamal had come, as his best friend, their very own Emrys, appeared in his full scarf-dancing glory, swinging from silken ropes hanging from the ceiling. While Sitara and Dasha were particularly delighted by his performance, they all reveled in his finale, leaping to their feet to catch one of the many scarves raining down over the audience. The next day, the crew, accompanied by their new friend Helene, spent some time shopping as preparations were being made about town for the fire festival. They made another trip to the Pink Pagoda and enjoyed performances by a man singing Menzoken poetry, as well as an involved dance of black-clad figures with staves. After receiving a recommendation, the crew later visited the shop of Mizushima Shiori to commission outfits for the festival. A falcon for Dasha, a feline for Mezzi, a phoenix for Akash, and a 3-tailed fox for Sitara. Kasumi refrained, intending to don a snake outfit he had worn from previous festivals. Mizushima informed them their festival garb would be ready in less than a week, just in time for the festival.
On the morning before the day of the fire festival, the city was awake early and bustling with last-minute preparations. Receiving an urgent message, Akash and Kasumi left early to meet with Kenichi. Their contact informed them that the Kawaguchi agents put in place to sabotage the Yamuchi compound had been discovered and killed or driven off. Kasumi and Akash volunteered to infiltrate the compound and place the fire charges with the rest of their crew acting as a distraction. After returning, they imparted to the crew the sudden change in circumstances and devised a 2-pronged plan to help Kasumi and Akash slip into the Yamuchi estate to locate the evidence needed to take to the authorities. While their plot would be both risky and elaborate, fortunately, Emrys was somehow able to procure local costumes and props to aid in the mystical element of their rather theatrical scheme.
Awakening early the next day, the crew donned their respective outfits and headed to town to enjoy the festival. Milling in the throngs of revelers, they soon found themselves swept up in the day's entertainments. Not long after a leash of many-tailed foxes passed by, one straggler popped up nearby with a yip. Satara, fully immersed in the spirit of the festival, gave chase, yipping after her fellow fox, and quickly disappeared into the crowd.
Mezi stumbled upon a large group of festival goers, also dressed as food lions, performing some sort of synchronized dance. She was intrigued but also a bit hesitant to join them. After a brief, non-verbal exchange with one of the food lions, Mezi was invited to join in on the dance.
Akash spent the afternoon with his new business partner, Haruka. He spent much of his time enjoying the vendors and the games, handing money to children they passed so that they could enjoy it as well. As they wandered from stall to stall, Akash searched for ways to cheer her up, as the death of her beloved still hung over her like a shadow. Spotting a simple, yet nicely crafted flower trinket that he knew would fit Haruka's style, Akash offered it to her in hopes of lifting her spirits. Akash was not sure what response he was expecting, but it was not the one he received. Haruka's eyes welled up with tears at the gift before she ran away into the crowd, sobbing. While Akash felt he had slowly begun to open his heart up again, perhaps due to the crew's influence, he supposed he still had a long way to go. He considered going after Haruka, but with tonight's main event now close at hand, he decided to leave her be.
With everyone in position, the festivities began. Dasha, hair full of ash and in the guise of a mourning spirit, climbed to the roof of the Nakashima winery and began shouting and speaking in tongues. Mezi, wearing a red horn mask resembling a demon spirit, burst through the back door of the warehouse. Using Vendella's axe, Mezi began destroying wine barrels throughout the production facility. Though 3 guards tried to stop her, Mezi easily overpowered them and continued to wreak havoc.
As the Nakashima winery was experiencing some technical difficulties, Satara and Kanuki, in their spirit and Oni guises, softly approached the Yamuchi compound. Though she was certain their plan would be effective, she had been loath to ask him to don the persona of the ogre his own people believed him to be, the reason for his exile, even if it were for a righteous purpose. Kanuki, who had watched after Koki and Sayori when they were brought aboard Viz Leany prior to Nobu's attack, had agreed nonetheless. Satara resolved not to allow his sacrifice to be in vain, and focused on the matter at hand. She darted past the front gate, catching the attention of the sentries just before Kanuki went barreling through it, and them. As the ensuing brawl drew more security, she drew her blades, covering for Kanuki and keeping the guards busy. Once things started to look dicey, she made an opening for their escape. They swiftly crossed to the back end of the estate, and she prayed she had given the others enough time.
Kasumi still had his doubts as to how well this very theatrical distraction would work, but saving everyone else wasn't part of his mission, so he pushed it to the back of his mind. As soon as Kanuki had smashed through the front gates, Kasumi bolted over the wall and made his way into the estate. He was creeping silently across the grounds, watching for guards, when the most unlikely thing occurred. He stepped on a mouse. He hadn't even seen the little rodent in his path, and now it was anything but quiet. 2 guards at the rear of the estate took notice and made their way over to investigate. He swiftly slunk away towards the house. He made it into the house without further incident, and much to his delight, it seemed empty, as Akash was busy searching and setting up flame charges. Kasumi's own search on the bottom floor turned up nothing until he came upon what appeared to be a study or meeting room. All the walls were solid wood except for the paneled doors that led into the manor's central courtyard. He scoured the room until at the base of the back wall he found a floor panel concealing a lockbox. How cliché, he chuckled to himself. As Kasumi reached for his prize, a chill crept over his body, and out of the darkness he heard a man's voice. "That does not belong to you." Kasumi bolted upright and turned to find a figure dressed in black robes standing at the doorway, wielding a naginata. His face was completely masked except for a small slit across the eyes. Kasumi knew he had to act fast, as smoke from the flames upstairs began to fill the room. In an act of desperation, he tried to wrestle the spear out of the dark figure's grasp, but to no avail. With time rapidly running out, Kasumi threw down his smoke bombs and jumped to grab the lockbox. He felt the blade slash through the air above him, but had no time to worry about that. Sprinting towards the outer door, he felt 2 more narrow misses behind him before crashing through the panels into the garden. Akash dropped to the center of the garden to check on Kasumi, but before he could voice his concern, Kasumi had already sprinted past him towards the exit, shouting, "Run!" Through the flames and smoke, Kasumi finally made it outside, prize in hand. He looked to see where Akash was headed so he could rendezvous with his employer, but Akash never flew out. Suddenly, a burst of wind erupted from within the manor. "You dumb bastard," Kasumi whispered at Akash, and to himself, as he tossed the lockbox into the yard and ran back into the burning building to save his friend. Only a fool would leave now. The house blazed around Akash as he stood in the courtyard, the heat beating oppressively upon his body. The only thing in the world that mattered to him in this moment was the object before him. On the chest of the dark figure was a palm-sized disc of petrified wood, inlaid with dark lines forming a mon, what appeared to be either a spiral or a series of concentric circles bisected by the image of a simple spear. Akash felt himself drawn to it, almost as though hypnotized. Akash embarked upon this journey to find the truths of the world, not hearsay, sailor talk, or rumors, but the true will of the Jinn. Now here before his very eyes was just that. As Akash walked towards the ninja, he called upon the strength of the wind to aid him. Staring unflinchingly at this display of power, the mysterious figure finally spoke. He extended an offer for Akash to join them, to follow the path and embrace the truth of their kami. After wondering briefly what he was referring to, Akash declined. He dashed in to try to grab a hold of the mon, but his opponent easily rebuffed him with his naginata, piercing and slashing his flesh. Determined to take the item, Akash did not heed his wounds, nor did he notice they were no longer alone, until Kasumi suddenly struck the dark figure from behind. With Kasumi's help, Akash finally laid a hand on the mon, and exerted his will to call upon the wind to lift them up. An eruption of flame shot out of the burning manor as Akash sent the 3 of them much higher than he had intended, high enough to see the entire city. In the struggle as they soared up and up, Akash managed to wrest the mon away from their foe, who upon closer inspection appeared to be very much like the terrifying demonic figures who had ambushed the crew in the night. As their ascent slowed, the dark figure began to claw his way up Akash's body, trying to grasp the mon, with Kasumi desperately clinging to his leg. Finally, Akash was able to draw a dagger and deal a mortal blow to their foe. His pitch-black eyes closed as he grew limp and began to fall, with Kasumi still attached. Kasumi kicked the body down, attempting to launch himself upwards, reaching out to grab Akash's outstretched hand, and demanding that his employer not drop him. However, Akash knew he had exhausted himself and did not possess the strength to call the wind to slow their fall. Grasping one another's hand, the pair plummeted out of the sky. They were met not with the ground, but with water, as they fell into the Jirogawa, the main river running through Jinla. After making it to shore and taking a few moments to make sure they were, in fact, still alive, the pair looked down at the strange artifact they had obtained. Discussing what had just transpired, they both agreed that the man they had fought seemed to be one of the Ryu. Suddenly recalling what they had gone to all this trouble for, they leapt up and limped their way back to the smoldering manor. Once Kasumi had recovered the chest, the 2 returned to the river, following it back into the city proper. Returning to the Kawaguchi establishment, they delivered the chest to Kenichi. Inside, they found a talent of jade, several pieces of jewelry, and quite a lot of incriminating evidence, including letters concerning the vandalism of the Rokuro winery, communications from Nobu about the attacks on Maki's men, and a contract for a hit on Akiyama Tsubasa. They also discovered a letter from Akiyama Haruka, graciously thanking the Yamuchi for their support after her husband's death, and very politely turning down their offer of marrying into their family. Entrusting the documents to Kenichi, the pair left with half of the talent of jade as a reward for their assistance in taking down the house of Yamuchi.
The rest of the crew rendezvoused back at the main event to try to enjoy the rest of the festivities. even as they overheard murmurs of vexed spirits about, and the bizarre phenomena at the Yamuchi estate. Satara, along with the rest of the city, saw the pillar of fire extending between the Yamuchi estate and the heavens, though witnesses said the buildings caught fire before that. While her mind was put mostly at ease once the crew confirmed they had seen Akash and Kasumi since then, she wondered at how their infiltration had resulted in the entire estate catching fire. She was distracted from her thoughts as they stopped by Rokuro's to sample his newest wine, and Satara saw amongst his customers a familiar face, her dancing partner from the Pink Pagoda. After buying Sakura a drink, they spent some time sharing stories and getting better acquainted.
The next morning, Akash presented the group with a mon taken from the Ryu agent who was killed at the Yamuchi compound. As Dasha touched the mon, she was struck by a feeling of dread. Taking the mon, Dasha flung it into the waves. Reacting without thinking, Akash attempted to blow Dasha overboard as he and Kasumi dove over the rails to recover the mon. As the crew pulled Dasha to safety, Akash rose from the water, surrounded by a corona of darkness, with black lines running down his arms. Once everyone was back on deck, the captain attempted to defuse the situation as Dasha threatened to leave the ship as long as the artifact was to remain on board. Satara convinced her that such an object of power, especially a dark one, would be much safer under the careful watch than lost in the world for anyone to find and abuse. Eager to discover how such an artifact could be abused, Kasumi suggested that they test them on. The party traveled to a small isolated bamboo grove outside the city. Somewhat surprisingly, Dasha took initiative in testing the mon, going to a meditative state and activating it. Dark lines shot up her veins as she compelled small animals to come to her. Dasha pushed herself, calling again and again, until her face became ashen and she fell unconscious. After Mezi revived Dasha, she described having seen a darkly cloaked figure reaching out to her. Kasumi attempted to use the mon to hypnotize Mezi, but couldn't seem to activate it. Taking the mon, Mezi tried using it while sticking her spear into the ground, but nothing in particular seemed different. After another failed attempt, dark lines ran across her muscles as she drove her spear deep into the earth. A few days later, the party took the mon to the beach. This time, Satara took it out into the shallows, where she performed a sword dance that seemed to cause the water to hold its shape for a split second longer than one would expect. She looked a little shaken and slightly puzzled as she returned to the group, and asked them if they saw anything. When they only relayed the strange effect on the water, she said at the end of her dance, she found herself face to face with a woman with seafoam skin and long stringy hair like kelp. Her face was set with large dark eyes, her ears spiny and webbed, and her mouth lined with sharp teeth. While Satara said little more, her crew could see plainly how it had unsettled her. Kasumi tried once more, and was able to use the mon this time. He seemed to vanish from the party's sight, except for Akash, whose keen senses caught sight of him. However, upon a second attempt, no one was able to spot Kasumi. Satara then suggested that Kasumi try to heal the fatigue that Dasha had sustained, and reluctantly Kasumi agreed. Rather than healing Dasha, the attempt caused Kasumi's old wounds to reopen. After this test, Kasumi made certain to extensively document everything he'd learned about the mon.
Despite the outcome of their last encounter, Akash decided to try calling upon his business partner. He found Haruka in calmer spirits and apologetic for leaving in such a manner. Her beloved Tsubasa, she explained, used to gift her with the same flower trinkets as what Akash had bought for her, and she had been overcome with memories and grief, though she thanked him for the gesture.
A few days later, the captain went to check in on Kenji, intending to offer him a place on the ship if he wanted. She discovered that Kenji, who was on the mend, had quietly left Viz Leany. Mezi agreed to go look for him and deliver the captain's message, dragging Kasumi along with her. Meanwhile, Satara met with her new dashing acquaintance from the Pink Pagoda and negotiated a collection of grains for trade from Helene. After asking around, Kasumi and Mezi discovered Kenji lived in a rundown building near the docks. Finding his room, they knocked but quickly realized he wasn't home. Kasumi proceeded to help himself to the possessions of the other occupants. Amongst Kenji's belongings was a small painting of what appeared to be a young Kenji, an even younger girl, and a couple who they assumed to be his parents. Once Kenji returned, Mezi extended the invitation to join the crew, but he respectfully declined. He indicated that he had decided to turn over a new leaf after his experiences with them, but still had business in the city. Accepting his decision, Kasumi and Mezi left Kenji in peace.
Deciding they wanted to know more about the Master of Arms, Akash and Kasumi met her early one morning as she was leaving the ship. When Jian informed the pair that her business was her own, Akash decided to tail her, and Kasumi went along to keep Akash from getting murdered. Jian, catching Akash, informed him that she was training and that he was not allowed to join her. After being rebuffed at the gate to the shrine of the Twisted Maple, Akash and Kasumi ascended to the nearby rooftop, spying a training yard within the shrine. The pair were spotted by some archers, who proceeded to launch a barrage of arrows. Akash, deflecting the first volley, was barely able to deflect the second. Kasumi decided it was time to go, and the two beat a retreat back to the ship. Several days had passed since their misadventure at the shrine. Having finally concluded their business in Jinla, Viz Leany set sail on the morning of the 15th of the 4th moon. Now on the ship, with little space and few distractions, Akash and Kasumi could not escape the Master of Arms' silent but venomous looks. Between Jian's seething and Kasumi's discomfort, it became impossible for the rest of the crew, much less the captain, to ignore. At dinner that evening, the captain called out the tension that had been simmering on board ship since before the crew set sail from Jinla. Upon discovering that Akash and Kasumi had spied on Jian, the two were roundly chastised. Kasumi, understanding they had offended Jian deeply, humbled himself before her and offered himself as a student. Akash, though he did not seem to entirely understand his fault in the matter, expressed his regret that Jian had been hurt by his actions. Jian stonily accepted their apologies and went below decks. Afterwards, Sitara spoke with Jian in her quarters, explaining that while it did not excuse his actions, she believed Akash truly had not meant to insult her, and had not anticipated how his behavior would affect those around him, perhaps because he was Jin-blooded. Jian acknowledged it was likely so. After all, she said, the spirit folk are always a little odd.
On the 19th of the 4th moon, Viz Leany stopped at Kuga, one of the last Minzokan villages along the coast between Xianla and the Northlands. Their arrival prompted something of a market day in the village, complete with singing, dancing, and storytelling. Emrys and Mezi performed a duet which culminated in an apparently luscious kiss for Mezi. Unbeknownst to their audience, the passionate lip-locking was entirely stage professional. The next morning, as the crew loaded the goods they had just traded for, they nearly made off with extra cargo. A very small child named Choi Yu, who wanted very, very badly to join them on their adventures. Sitara assured Choi Yu she would certainly become a sailor when she were older, and returned the protesting child to its parents. Sitara recalled her childhood, when every time her father would have to leave, she would beg and plead to go with him. The tears had only worsened when Stig left to sail with him, while her parents forced her to wait until she was older, though she later came to understand their reasons for it. As she watched Kuga disappear around the bend, she hoped Choi Yu would forbear, but cling to that passion, as she had. She smiled as she turned her gaze toward the mysterious and ruggedly beautiful lands of the north.